He wrote one sentence that got him labeled evil for 500 years. But every powerful person secretly follows it. In Iwu Sen, Niccolo Machiavelli was sitting in exile, broke and forgotten, writing about power he no longer had. And in his most controversial book, The Prince, he wrote something that made the world hate him. It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. The church banned it. Philosophers condemned it. Leaders publicly denounced it. But privately, they all used it. Because Machiavelli wasn't teaching evil. He was teaching reality. The uncomfortable truth that love is unreliable but fear is consistent. And if you want to maintain power, maintain authority, maintain respect, you better understand the difference. Here's what people misunderstand about this principle. They think Machiavelli was saying be cruel, be a tyrant, make everyone hate you. But that's not what he meant at all. He wasn't advocating for mindless brutality. He was making an observation about human nature, about what actually keeps people in line when things get difficult. Love is beautiful. Love is powerful when it's real. But Machiavelli watched rulers rise and fall, and he noticed a pattern. Leaders who relied on being loved were abandoned the moment things got hard. The moment sacrifice was required. The moment following them became inconvenient or dangerous. People who loved you yesterday will betray you tomorrow if it serves them. Not because they're evil, because love without consequence is temporary. But fear is reliable, not terror, not hatred, but respect mixed with the knowledge that there are real consequences for crossing certain lines. That kind of fear creates stability, creates boundaries, creates an environment where people think twice before betraying you or breaking the rules. In Renaissance Italy, this wasn't theory. This was survival. City-states were constantly at war. Alliances shifted overnight. One week you were someone's friend. The next week they were plotting your death. In that chaos, Machiavelli studied what actually worked, what kept leaders alive, what maintained order. And the answer wasn't being nice. It was being respected through a combination of competence and a credible threat of consequences. He tells the story of Cesare Borgia, a prince who took over a chaotic region. The people there had no respect for authority. Crime was everywhere. Nobody followed rules because there were no consequences. So Borgia appointed a brutal governor to restore order. The governor was harsh, ruthless, and he got results. The region became orderly through fear of consequences. Then Borgia did something brilliant. Once order was established, he had the governor publicly executed. He blamed all the cruelty on the governor alone. And suddenly, Borgia looked merciful while maintaining the order that fear had created. The people feared consequences enough to behave, but didn't hate Borgia for it. That's the application of the principle. Strategic use of fear without becoming hated. Because here's the key distinction Machiavelli makes. Being feared is good. Being hated is fatal. Fear keeps people respectful and in line. Hatred makes them want to destroy you. So you need fear without cruelty. Consequences without randomness. Authority without tyranny. That's the balance. He writes, men love at their own free will, but fear at the will of the prince. What's he saying? Love is outside your control. You can't make someone love you. You can't force loyalty. It's voluntary. It comes and goes, based on feelings that shift constantly. But fear, you can create that. You can control that. Through consistent consequences, through demonstrated strength, through making it clear what happens when lines are crossed. This sounds cold. But watch how the world actually works. The boss everyone loves but doesn't respect gets walked over. The parent who's all affection with no boundaries raises kids who don't listen. The leader who tries to be everyone's friend gets betrayed the moment it's convenient. Why? Because there's no consequence, no reason to maintain respect when it becomes difficult. But the boss people respect because there are real consequences for poor performance. They maintain authority. The parent who sets clear boundaries and follows through. Their kids actually listen. The leader who's fair but firm. They keep loyalty, even in hard times. Not because people love them. Because people respect what happens when boundaries are crossed. Machiavelli also understood something about generosity. He said that trying to be loved through gifts and kindness backfires. Because generosity creates expectations. You give once, they expect it again. You give more, they expect even more. And the moment you can't give, or won't give, they resent you. They feel cheated. And love turns to hatred faster than you'd believe. But if you're known for being firm and fair, for having standards and consequences, people don't expect gifts. They expect consistency. And when you do show kindness, it means more. It's a bonus, not an expectation. So you get credit for the good without being punished for not giving constantly. He's not saying never be kind. He's saying kindness without authority is weakness. And people exploit weakness. But authority with occasional kindness, that's power. That's respect. That's sustainable. Now let's talk about why this matters for you. Because you're not a Renaissance prince. But you still deal with authority, with respect, with getting people to actually follow through on what you need. Think about your workplace. The managers people love but don't respect get ignored. Their requests are treated as suggestions. Deadlines get missed. Standards slip. Because there's no consequence. No fear of what happens if you don't perform. Just love, which feels nice but doesn't drive behavior. But the manager who's fair, clear about expectations, and has real consequences for not meeting them, people perform. Not because they love that manager, because they respect the boundaries. They know what happens if they cross them. And that fear of consequences creates better results than affection ever could. Or think about parenting. The parents who just want their kids to love them, who avoid conflict, who don't enforce boundaries. They lose control. The kids don't respect them. They push limits constantly because there's no consequence. Just empty threats and disappointed looks. But parents who set clear rules and actually enforce them, the kids might not like them in the moment. Might even say they hate them, but they respect them. They know the boundaries. And years later, they're grateful for the structure. Because fear of consequences taught them discipline that love alone never could. Or relationships. The person who's all giving, all accommodating, all desperate to be loved. They get taken for granted. Walked over, used. Because there's no consequence for treating them badly, no reason to maintain respect. But the person who has boundaries, who walks away from disrespect, who makes it clear what they won't tolerate, they get treated better. Not because they're mean. Because there's a credible consequence for crossing their lines. People respect that, even if they don't love it. Here's what Machiavelli understood. Humans are self-interested, not evil, just focused on their own survival and benefit. And when following you serves them, they will. But when it stops serving them, they'll leave. Unless there's a consequence that makes leaving worse than staying. Love says, stay because you want to. Fear says, stay because leaving or betraying has consequences you don't want. The first is unreliable because feelings change. The second is reliable because consequences don't change. They're consistent, predictable, and that creates stable authority. But here's the crucial part. Machiavelli warns that you must avoid being hated at all costs. Because hatred makes people willing to accept any consequence to hurt you, even if it destroys them too. So you can't be randomly cruel, can't be unfair, can't punish without reason. That creates hatred, which is fatal. The consequences you create must be justified, proportional, consistent. When someone crosses a clear line, the consequence happens. Not because you're angry, because the boundary was known and they chose to cross it. That's fair, that's respected. That doesn't create hatred. Random cruelty, that creates hatred. Inconsistent punishment, that creates hatred. Disproportionate consequences, that creates hatred. But clear boundaries with predictable consequences, that creates respected authority. That's the difference between fear and hatred, between being effective and being overthrown. So how do you apply this? First, set clear boundaries. In your work, your relationships, your leadership, make it obvious what's acceptable and what's not. Don't assume people know. Tell them. Second, enforce those boundaries consistently. Not emotionally, not vindictively. Just consistently. When someone crosses the line, the consequence happens. Every time, no exceptions. That's what creates the fear that maintains respect. Third, be fair. Don't punish people for things they couldn't know were wrong. Don't create consequences that are way bigger than the violation. Proportionality matters. Justice matters. Because that's the difference between fear and hatred. Fourth, don't try to be loved by everyone. It's impossible and it makes you weak. Focus on being respected. On being fair but firm. On having authority that people take seriously. Love might come later as a bonus, but it can't be the foundation. Machiavelli's principle isn't about being evil, it's about being effective. It's about understanding that authority requires consequence, that respect requires boundaries, that power requires people to fear what happens when they cross you. Not because you're cruel, but because you're consistent. The leaders who try to be loved end up powerless. The leaders who understand strategic fear maintain authority, not through hatred, through respected boundaries and consistent consequences. 500 years later, every effective leader still uses this principle, they just don't say it out loud. Because it sounds harsh, but it works. And in positions of authority, what works matters more than what sounds nice. You don't need people to love you. You need people to respect you. And respect comes from knowing there are real consequences for crossing your boundaries. That's not evil. That's how authority actually works. Watch the next one for more uncomfortable truths.